Tracy Claeys is out as the head football coach at the University of Minnesota. He confirmed his firing to KSTP television this afternoon. Claeys and the Gophers won a bowl game this year, but this probably has a lot to do with his support for his players after an alleged sexual assault on campus. Obviously, we will get plenty more details as we move forward here, but welcome into our BTN studios, Dave Revsine and Gerry Dinardo. In some ways, surprising news, but I think if you've been reading the tea leaves here, Gerry, maybe not a shock given everything that's happened here in the last month.
Certainly not a shock, for sure. When Tracy became the head coach, they gave him a 3-year contract. To me, that was the first indication this thing may be short-lived. And the wording of the contract, I think, relieved the University of Minnesota of a lot of their financial responsibilities. A new athletic director, Coyle, comes on board. That's the second thing. Winning a bowl game, Rever, those days are over where that secures a coach. The alleged sexual assault, I think it's part of it. I think it made it easier for the Minnesota administration to make this decision. And in Tracy Claeys' own words to his team, this could cost me my job, meaning supporting them could cost him the job. So I'm not surprised a bit. I think it's all these things that have added up to this decision.
So you don't think this is just about football, but you don't think it's not, at least in part, about football?
Yeah, I think it's always in part of different things. The crises with the alleged sexual assault, absolutely part of this. Had that not occurred, I think we'd still be in the same position here. I think that may have sped up the process. It may have intensified the feelings that they needed to change. If you give a coach 3-year contract, what's the end game with that? Because after 1 year, he has 2 years left, so he can't recruit, so you have to extend him anyway. I think a one-year contract and a 3-year contract is no different. So I am of the opinion that this was going to happen either way. You mentioned winning a bowl game. Nowadays, football, winning a bowl game is not a big deal.
And that's true, but they also won 9 games, which is something that the Gophers don't do very often. I mean, when you're saying that at least in part this is about football, what's wrong here that they feel like they need to rectify? I mean, they have just dug themselves out of the Tim Brewster hole. It looked like they were able to continue some of the momentum that Jerry Kill got back. So tell me why 9 wins isn't acceptable at Minnesota.
Because all of my life experiences in coaching says this: when they no longer believe in your plan, nothing else matters. And so the new athletic director, Coyle, obviously doesn't believe in Tracy Claeys' plan. He may not even believe in Tracy Claeys as a coach. That's when it ends. Whether it's 1 year in the NFL, whether it's 10 years in Baton Rouge, it doesn't matter. When the plan is not believable and supported by the administration, that's the time. So you can quantify it with the numbers and you can give them all the stats. If they don't believe in the plan, you're done.
I mean, I hear you, but it's the second time they've won 9 games since 1905.
Doesn't matter. They haven't reached expectations, in their opinion. They can be better than they've been under Tracy Claeys. That's the thought process.
Right.
Now, if it is about the alleged sexual assault, well, that's different. I just happen to believe that's not what it's about. I think that's part of it. If you want to point to that, then it's hard to argue, right?
Right. I mean, I guess I just look at particularly the fact that he tweeted out support for his players. I mean, it kind of flew in the face of what the administration was saying. So in other words, he took a stance that was opposed to his bosses. I think you could perceive that if you were to go to to an extreme on it, almost as insubordination, certainly bordering on it, because the university was sending one message and he was sending a different message. It seems to me that might underlie this. Now, I hear what you're saying, and a new AD wants his own guy, but you need to understand the history of your program. I mean, second time since 1905, they won 9 games. To me, it's got to be about the alleged sexual assault and the stance that he took.
Well, I think that's part of it. But again, I maintain, I look at their recruiting numbers. They're either 13th or 14th in recruiting. They're building a new facility, and maybe they feel like they can get someone with more experience than Tracy Claeys. Tracy Claeys has very limited experience. He was with Jerry Kill most of his career. He's on the defensive side of the ball. You can make a case that depending on who they could get, this could be a good move by the University of Minnesota. I can't argue the alleged sexual assault. If that's why, they should come out and say that that's why. But that was a lack of communication as well. As the players kept saying that we want due process. They didn't understand. They got due process under the Title IX directive, not under the law, not under the Constitution of the United States. But if that was communicated to Tracy Claeys and the team earlier, I don't know that we would have had the boycott. They were well within their right to follow the Title IX recommendation of process with alleged sexual assault. I don't think the players knew that until they met with the president.
Right.
Had they met with the president early, or had Tracy met with the president early, I think the poor communication.
And a lack of understanding. I mean, I think the players just didn't understand the issues and didn't understand that what happens in a court is very different than what happens within a university structure.
And once the student athletes learned that, they backed off
Absolutely.
right away. Why? If they were told earlier, they wouldn't have had this crisis. So I don't think it all falls on Tracy Claeys' shoulders either, the way the boycott went down.
No, I hear you. But again, I mean, to take the stance that he took, certainly you need to be informed as an adult in the room as to what the real issues are before you take a stance on it. And you have to understand the ramifications. And to your point, I mean, he said, hey, this may cost me. So maybe he did understand the ramifications, and he just felt like, for whatever reason, he had to stand with his players, even if everything tells you that that's the wrong stance to take.
You know, if it wasn't for the 3-year contract, then I would put more weight on the crises. But what was the end game with the 3-year contract? They were basically saying, you are not really the best that we can find to run our program, because you don't give the best person that you can find to run your program a 3-year contract. It's illogical. So if they thought Tracy was the best guy to go forward with, they would have given him a 5-year contract last year. And I think the language of the contract will show us that there's very little money that's going to be owed to Tracy Claeys, which is another indication when they gave him the 3-year contract that they weren't looking far down the future.
No, and you had an interim AD. She probably did the right thing, frankly, for the university. I mean, you don't tie up the university in a contract when you know you're not necessarily going to be the person there long term. You know, speaking of the AD, when you know that someone else may come in and you don't want them to come in with their hands tied. So it probably made sense. I guess I think it's just interesting from the outside to look at the success they had relative to their history and see the result and believe that it's entirely due to football. I find it hard to believe it's entirely due to football.
Well, then Glenn Mason would still be coaching.
Well, right. Well, but that's the, you know, look, we've talked about this forever. I mean, they made a mistake by firing Glenn Mason, and they didn't understand kind of where they were. They didn't understand the success that he had had, and we've discussed that maybe after 10 years or so, sometimes no matter how well you do, it gets a little stale, and I think that's what happened with Glenn. But they were overjoyed under Jerry Kill to get back to exactly where they were under Glenn.
Right. So it's not always where you are. It's where the people that you work for think you can go. They knew where Glenn Mason was. It was clear. It was 9 bowl games out of 12 years, if I remember right. They knew where they were. Tim Brewster promised them the Rose Bowl. So they said, okay, let's get rid of Mason. I'm serious, right?
I know he did.
You and I lived this.
How'd that work out?
I know, but that doesn't mean that the people making the decisions didn't believe that Tim Brewster was going to take him to the Rose Bowl.
Okay, so let's look at the Minnesota situation now. How, again, we're going to find out a lot more in terms of why this decision was made, and maybe that will impact to a slight extent how you answer the question that I'm about to pose to you. But how good a situation is this right now? You've got a new facility being built. You have a brand new stadium, which is absolutely gorgeous. You have a committed administration. I am of the belief that the success that Wisconsin has had has been the most difficult portion of this Minnesota job, that has made it hard because I think they always measure themselves against Wisconsin. They're continually falling short, and they believe they should be able to compete with them, and there's no reason to say they shouldn't be able to.
Yeah, you and I think, disagree with what I'm about to say, because we've talked about it as it relates to Purdue. I believe that anybody in the West can win the West Division. I don't think there's anybody in the West that has so many more resources than everybody else in the West that they're a slam dunk to win the West. So if you get the right coach to find the right recruiting niche at Minnesota or any of the other 6 Western Division schools, you can win the West. So if you're asking me, was Minnesota win the West with the right coach? Absolutely.
And I think so, too.
Can Wisconsin.
Yes. And I think Purdue can, too.
I think Purdue,
I just think they can win it with scheme, not with recruiting. You think it's a recruiting job. I think it's more of a scheme job. That's where we do.
All right. You know, the old expressions, it's more about the Jimmies and Joes and the X's and O's. If you think you can X and O your way to the West, you go X and O, I'll go recruit.
Well, my X's and O's aren't very good. They're not as good as yours. But I think you need to recruit at a higher level than they have.
Right.
However, I think when they've had their success historically, it's because they've been a cutting-edge X&O program.
And I know Mace is going to join us here in a minute, but, you know, Mace got some guys out of Detroit. I mean, you have to have a niche in recruiting, right? Every school has a different niche in recruiting. I didn't see Tracy Claeys looking for his niche unless it was going to continue to be the 2 or 3 stars out of Texas, which made him competitive, but it didn't point to a winning the West, in my opinion.
Right. And I agree with you 1,000%. I think there is no reason that Minnesota doesn't look at that division and say, why can't we compete and why can't we win? And they have not done it. But again, I would argue 9 wins was pretty good. I mean, I think this is about more than football. Glenn Mason joining us now on the phone, our BTN colleague. And Mace, first of all, your reaction when you heard the news about Tracy Claeys.
You know, fellas, I was really shocked. I've been asked, quite a bit. I was doing the Rose Bowl, and I'm still out in California, but people were speculating both out here and getting calls from, back east, what did I think was going to happen with Tracy, and I really was kind of confident that he'd keep his job. I didn't think they'd, make a change. I've been listening to the conversation between you and Gerry, and obviously I live in that environment right there, and I think the decision to fire him has nothing to do with football. I really don't think it has anything to do with what the recruiting perception is right now. I think it has everything to do with the boycott, how it was handled. I think when Tracy tweeted that tweet that he did, and then the report came out, public opinion, as I lived there, really turned against him. They couldn't believe that he put that out there, that he was supporting the boycott. And I understand about all the miscommunication in between, but I'm just telling you that the average guy in the street, in the coffee shop, and wherever said, oh, my God, I can't believe he put that tweet out there and support.
So, Mace, is it your belief that had Tracy Claeys not sent that tweet, he would still be the head coach of Minnesota today? Oh, I think we lost Mace. That was a really abrupt way for Mace to finish. He usually goes on much longer than that. So we'll get him back in just a second.
I have to say, I'm not surprised he's still in California. and I think we need to...
You'd still be there, too.
I think we need to ask Mace why the 3-year contract then. And would they, if it wasn't for the boycott, does Mace think that they would renew him?
Because I think their hands were tied. They're in an uncomfortable situation mid-season. And so you say, what's our best solution mid-season? Our best solution is to go with Tracy in the short term and to see whether or not he is the guy, to give ourselves minimal financial responsibility if he's not the guy, but if he is, that we go forward with him long term. I mean, I think that's what that was about. But I agree with you. They protect themselves. I think it was a smart move by Minnesota, and I don't think Tracy Claeys had any leverage to reject it.
Right. I guess the term interim is what bothers me. I mean, interim still means you should be acting in long-term interest of whoever you're working for. So
it wasn't the long-term interest. They were able to get themselves out of the commitment.
Well, then they should have given him a 1-year contract. The 3-year contract made no sense to me whatsoever. It didn't help him recruiting. Make it a 1-year contract and come back and evaluate.
Mace is back with us now, I understand. Okay, Glenn, let me ask you this. Based on what you were saying a few moments ago, had Tracy Claeys not sent out that tweet that he did, do you believe he's still the head football coach at Minnesota today?
I really believe, I'm not so sure about just the tweet, but I think if he would have handled the boycott, threat of the boycott, would have handled that in a stronger position. And let's not forget, he knew that boycott was coming, and when it actually came out, I don't believe he was even in Minneapolis. He had decided to travel out to San Diego for the press conference for the Holiday Bowl. And I think Gerry would agree with me. If I think that was coming down as a head coach, a more experienced head coach, I'd have said, I'm not going to any press conference. I better be right here trying to do damage control. And along with that, some of the side issues, there had been articles leading up to that the attendance in football was down this year. Then after the boycott, it was coming out that there was, especially after the the petition and the tweet, that 70% of the season ticket holders were threatening not to renew their season ticket orders. And then you talked about the new facility. They're building that facility, but they're not done fundraising. I know for a fact that fundraising isn't going as well as they'd like. There were some potential contributors that said, because of this issue, let's put it on hold right now. So to me, the way this whole thing was handled by Minnesota was very poor. And you can point a finger at Tracy Claeys, but you can point a finger at a lot of other people. I think it's a classic example on how not to handle a situation. How often have we, talked about, you don't want to take a one-day bad story and turn it into a two-day bad story or a three-day bad story or a four-day bad story. This just goes on and on and on and on. And, when you talked about Tracy taking that 3-year contract, I know Tracy extremely well. He was a student assistant for me at Kansas. And while he was at the interim, I stopped in one day and I said, Tracy, he said, let me give you advice as a friend. I said, do not take this contract take this job under any circumstance unless you get a 5-year contract. And he said, Coach, I'll take it under any conditions I can. I said, you're making a big mistake. I said, they're in a bind. You got more leverage than you think. And I said, they're not willing to pay the big bucks. So if they pass on you and you've got public opinion right now, they're going to go after outside and hire an unknown assistant coach like a Tim Brewster. And he's not going to come for less than a 5-year contract. So you're exactly where you want it. Well, he took it on a 3-year basis. The next time I saw him, I said, well, you can't do anything about it now. I said, here's what you need to do. You need to win at least 8 games, and then hire me as your agent, and I'll get you a big-time contract, and I wouldn't even I wouldn't even charge you, And that's why when it goes down again, he won 9 football games, and by their standards, and as many times that they're changed their sock there, so to speak. Dave, I heard you talking about being compared to Wisconsin. The other program that the Gopher Faithful compared to is Iowa. And you look back and forth. And one of the things I look at Iowa, I say, they've had 3 athletic directors since 1968. They've had 2 football coaches since 1978. When you count up the number of athletic directors, I had 3 during my 10-year tenure. When you look at the number of athletic directors that have been there, either full-time athletic directors or interim, and now the number of football coaches since I departed, it's alarming.
Hey, Mace, you mentioned the fundraising slowing down and people losing confidence in the program and maybe season tickets being down. Even if the boycott never happened, what would they have done with Tracy Claeys with 2 years left on his contract? Would you think they would have given him 5 years, given him 3 more years? Is that what you think would have happened?
Yeah, Jerry, I really think they would have, and I say that because they got Tracy, and to an average person, when you say he's making $1.5 million a year, that's a lot of money. You and I both know things have changed, but by the standard, that is not the going rate. We've got assistant coaches making more than that now. They're talking about Don Brown at Michigan as the defensive coordinator is be paid more than Tracy Claeys was. And so I think that if they would have been contemplating making a change and say, okay, who are we going to get that really would whet the appetite of the Gopher Faithful, I think you would agree. You'd probably say, well, you better start about $3 million a year, and you better look at really upping the assistant coaches' salaries. And I think that would have scared them away big time.
Who are they going to get, Mace? Who are logical candidates here?
Well, I don't know the logical candidates. I can tell you that the 2 names that were being surfaced during the speculation, no surprise, P.J. Fleck and Les Miles. They say, hey, if we're going to go get a young, energetic guy, let's go get Les Miles. Or they say, hey, if we want to get a guy, really is not going to make all the mistakes of a first-year coach, let's go get Les Miles. He's out of work. But then again, I think Jerry can answer this. What's going to be the starting salary for those guys? And is, Minnesota, really changed it? A former player, it was really funny, back from the Lou Holtz era, says, I tell you, we ought to go hire P.J. Fleck because he could be another Lou Holtz at Minnesota. And my response was, you mean have a losing record and leave after 2 years? Is that what you're talking about? Because that's the fact, but people forget that.
Mace, the facility coming to a stall because they're having an issue with a head coach, that doesn't make any sense to me either. I think that's more of the problem than it is the solution, right? All of a sudden, they hit a little bump in the road and they're going to stop construction. I mean, that's a problem with getting a head coach that you're going to pay $3 or $4 million or whatever the going rate is these days. So I see this systematically a problem as well. I don't see this as an isolated incident just with Tracy Claeys. You agree or disagree?
Well, first of all, I'm not aware that the construction of the facilities has come to a halt. You know, it's just like any other university. There's a lot of different creative ways that you can pay for things. I can just tell you that they're under construction full tilt every time I go by there. I'm just not sure that they've raised enough money or haven't raised the money that they'd like to pay for it, but they're not, you know, they're not coming to a halt. You know, the thing about it, Jerry, and you've heard me say this a million times, you know, some people don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And that's human nature. That's okay. Other people don't know what they don't know, but they think they know everything. That's dangerous. And I can tell you that they have a serious case of that in some regards with the fan base and even some of the administration at the University of Minnesota. They're building these facilities. Are they going to be a big improvement? Absolutely, well needed. But probably when they get done, they're still going to be behind a lot of people. For them to say, oh, we're going to have the finest facilities in the Big Ten, but they've never been to Nebraska. They've never been to Ohio State. They haven't been to Penn State. They haven't been to Michigan, if you get my drift. They just don't know.
That's a great point, Mace. Absolutely. We've lived that, right? When you go to a school and they think they have the best facilities and you put them on a plane and you fly them around the country to see everyone else's facilities and they say, oh, my goodness, I didn't know we were that far behind.
I will say this, though, guys. They built a beautiful stadium. I mean, it is really nice. All indications are they're building a really good practice facility, not just to benefit the football team, but to benefit all of the student athletes of Minnesota. Let me ask you this, Mace. You did live this very place. You won 10 games there. You had a ton of success, and yet ultimately you were let go. And so I think you're uniquely qualified to answer this question. How does Minnesota take that next step? How do they become a team that, let's say, from where Jerry and I were talking right before you came on, a team that wins the West? What do they need?
Well, I think first and foremost, and I used to talk about this when I was back there, fellas, when you develop an attitude from the top down in the university, from the Board of Regents to the president, that winning football is very, very important. It's the showcase of the university, the front porch of the university, however you want to put it. And we're going to do everything within our means, within the rules to do it. Now, every school doesn't have the same resources, but when you start thinking about that mentality, give you an example. When you bring kids to campus and you're going to show them where they're going to live, part of the recruiting, it's got to be the best dorms. I remember we were building new dorms when I was there, and I went and I pleaded my case. We got to have better dorms to show guys they have some availability. And someone makes the decision, you're getting 0 rooms. No, we're not going to do that. It's going to go all upperclassmen. That's something that doesn't cost any money. That becomes a decision that it's important in recruiting when they see the big picture.
Hey, Mace, you would probably agree, though, this is a better job than it was when you were there, because for you to win a Big Ten championship, you were in one division, 10 schools or 11 schools. Now you can compete with the other 6 in your division, and then you just have to beat one team in Indianapolis. So would you agree with me that this is perhaps a better job as far as competition, winning the Big Ten, than it was in your time there?
Oh, without a doubt. You know, I don't know why everything in place, and you got to remember something, things are in place now that I didn't have. We played in the Dome. That was absolutely terrible, the worst facility. The TCF Stadium, as Dave mentioned, is really nice. They're getting new facilities. They've added more money to the assistant coaches pool. I'm sure they're going to, up the head coach contract. And when you think about who you have to compete against in the West compared to the East, there's no comparison. There's absolutely no reason why they can't compete and win and somehow, some way, find a way to Indianapolis.
Glenn Mason, former Minnesota coach, joining us here. Of course, our BTN analyst. Mace, thanks a lot for your time, and We're sorry to take you away from the sunshine in Southern California. So you
well,
go back out
I
there.
got to tell you something. I was sitting on the Malibu right here on the beach, my friend's house, sitting, smoking a cigar, having an adult beverage, and now anything for you guys.
I'm not sorry a bit we took you away from that, just to go on record.
I feel bad about it.
I don't feel bad at all.
Yeah, Jerry's kind of
Happy New
gloating.
Year. Love you guys.
All right, Mace. Thanks a lot. Our coverage continuing here on BTN. Again, the big news, Tracy Claeys out as the head coach at the University of Minnesota. We are awaiting comment from the university.